Hello. Senior Conservatives have been rallying behind John Major as the pressure mounts for a leadership challenge. The Employment Secretary, Michael Portillo, called on the party to unite behind the Prime Minister or risk losing the next general election. His support comes as the government faces new pressure over the sale of arms to Iran.
John Major arrived home from the summit meeting in Canada, making it clear he'll press on with his policies and shrug off talk of a leadership challenge. Today, senior colleagues, including one tipped as a future Tory leader, urged the party to back Mr Major.
Unless it pulls itself together and pulls its socks up, it won't be able to win the next election. And so we must get behind the leader of our party, and we must start talking about the policies that we want to put to the election and the difficulties that there would be if we were to elect a Labour government.
But it'll be a difficult week for John Major and the government, starting with a hostile Commons debate tomorrow on arms to Iran. A debate given added spice by new revelations about BMARC, the company said to have sold naval guns to Iran during the Gulf War in breach of export guidelines. Ministry of Defence police have admitted they mistakenly held BMARC documents, which were never presented to the Scott inquiry.
Clearly, if the information which we know was in the possession of government when the Scott inquiry was set up had been made available, then Scott would not just have been about arms to Iraq, it would also have been about Iran and the whole dealings of BMARC.
Labour also claimed that Jonathan Aitken, a former director of the company, will have more questions to answer after the discovery of the new BMARC documents. Hugh Pym, ITN, Westminster.
The remaining 26 United Nations hostages held by the Bosnian Serbs have been released. They've been exchanged for 4 Serb soldiers detained by the UN. In the Bosnian capital Sarajevo today, 9 people were killed by a shell as they queued for water during a lull in the fighting. At least 14 others were injured in the attack. Chechen rebels have released more hostages from a hospital in southern Russia and say the remaining 500 will be freed soon. They agreed the move after Russia promised to halt its military action in the breakaway Republic of Chechnya, one of the rebels' main demands.
The day began with gunfire. Russian bullets slammed into the battered walls of the hospital, but this time there was no full-scale attack. Instead, a little later, a team of Russian negotiators walked out into no man's land and entered the burnt-out hospital for talks with the Chechens. There is now a small glimmer of hope for the surviving hostages, but it remains very difficult to see how there can be a peaceful solution with the hatred that exists between Russians and Chechens and the blood that was spilt yesterday. Overnight, television crews had been allowed into the hospital and were told by the hostages that about 30 of them had been killed by Russian fire. Their fate is in the hands of the Chechen commander Shamil Basayev, and in today's talks he and the Russians appear to reach an outline agreement, the hostages' freedom in exchange for a Russian ceasefire in Chechnya. Then the first stage of the deal was carried out, the release of a large number of women and children as a sign of good faith by the Chechens. For some, there was overwhelming joy. A mother burst into tears on getting back her son. The Russians have apparently agreed to let the Chechen fighters leave with some of the hostages to guarantee their safety. But the question is whether their departure will turn into a bloodbath. Julian Mannion, ITN, Budyonnovsk.
England are out of the Rugby World Cup, battered into submission by the All Blacks, and one man in particular, Jonah Lomu. The giant winger scored 4 tries as England crashed to a record points defeat, 45-29. Finally, another famous defeat was being remembered today, but this time it was the French who were on the losing side. It was 180 years ago today at Waterloo that the Duke of Wellington changed the course of history in Europe in just 24 hours. Today the fighting was slightly more good-spirited. The soldiers, 3,000 enthusiasts from Europe and the United States. And that's it for now. Tonight's late news is at 11:15. Goodbye.